Life was perfect for NBA superstar Shaq Thompson. Mansion, cars, fame, he had it all. Or so he thought, until that rainy night when he saw a homeless man outside his old neighborhood store. A man he recognized, Kevin Johnson, his childhood best friend who'd taught him everything about basketball, who'd disappeared 20 years ago without a trace. But finding Kevin was just the beginning, because the next day, Shaq would uncover a truth so shocking it would turn his perfect world upside down. His best friend wasn't just homeless, he was hiding something big enough to get them both killed. Now, Shaq has to choose. Walk away and keep his perfect life, or risk everything to save the friend who once saved him. Sometimes the biggest game isn't played on a basketball court. Sometimes it's played in the shadows, where losing means more than missing a shot. This is a story about friendship, sacrifice, and secrets that can either destroy you or set you free. The crowd roared as Shaq Thompson dunked the ball through the hoop. Another perfect shot. The buzzer rang, and the Chicago Bulls had won again. Shaq pumped his fist in the air as his teammates rushed to hug him. From the outside, his life looked perfect. "Thompson! Thompson! Thompson!" The fans chanted his name as he walked off the court. Their voices followed him all the way to the locker room, but somehow they felt empty to him tonight. After showering and changing into his designer suit, Shaq walked to his Ferrari in the players' parking lot. A group of kids waited by the fence, waving basketball cards with his picture on them. "Mr. Thompson, can you sign these, please?" They jumped up and down, their eyes shining with hope. Shaq stopped and smiled. He never said no to kids asking for autographs. As he signed their cards, one boy looked just like his old friend Kevin. Same bright eyes, same crooked smile. "For Yuji, a moment." Shaq's hand froze over the card. "You okay, Mr. Thompson?" the boy asked. "Yeah, just remembered something," Shaq said, shaking off the memory. He finished signing and waved goodbye to the kids. Inside his car, Shaq didn't start the engine right away. Instead, he closed his eyes and let his mind drift back to where it all began, the rough streets of Southside Chicago, 20 years ago. He was just 10 years old, bouncing a worn-out basketball in front of his mom's apartment building. The ball barely had any grip left, but it was his most precious possession. That's when he first met Kevin. "You're holding it wrong," a voice had said. Shaq looked up to see a skinny kid about his age, wearing shoes that were too big for his feet. "What do you know about it?" Shaq had answered, hugging the ball to his chest. "I know everything about basketball," Kevin said with a grin. "My dad used to play semi-pro before he hurt his knee. Here, let me show you." Kevin didn't just show Shaq how to hold the ball properly. He became his best friend. Every day after school, they would practice together on the cracked concrete court behind the grocery store. Kevin taught Shaq all the tricks his dad had shown. Him and Shaq grew stronger and better with each passing day. "One day, we're gonna make it big together," Kevin would say as they shared a bag of chips, watching the sunset from their favorite spot on the rusty bleachers. "You'll be the star player, and I'll be your agent. We'll buy our moms big houses and nice cars." "Promise?" Shaq had asked, holding out his fist. "Promise," Kevin answered, bumping it with his own. They practiced through summer heat and winter snow. When Shaq felt like giving up, Kevin pushed him harder. When Kevin was sad about his dad losing another job, Shaq made him laugh with silly dance moves. They were more than friends, they were brothers. Until that day when Kevin didn't show up for practice, or the next day, or the day after that. Shaq had gone to Kevin's apartment, but nobody answered the door. At school, Kevin's seat was empty. A week later, all his stuff was gone from his locker. It was like he had disappeared into thin air. The screech of a car horn brought Shaq back to the present. He blinked and started his engine. His mansion was waiting for him, all 20,000 square feet of it. Inside, he had everything money could buy: a private basketball court, a movie theater, even a bowling alley. But most of the rooms stayed empty. The security gate opened automatically as he pulled into his driveway. Tonight, the huge house looked especially lonely against the dark sky. Shaq checked his phone. 3 missed calls from his agent about new endorsement deals, 2 text messages from girls he'd met at clubs, and an email about a charity event tomorrow. He ignored them all and walked to his trophy room. Gleaming awards filled the shelves. NBA Most Valuable Player, All-Star Game, MVP, Olympic gold medal. In the middle stood his first trophy, from a street basketball tournament he'd won with Kevin when they were 12. Shaq picked up the small plastic trophy. The gold paint was chipping off, but he could still read their names scratched into the base. Shaq and Kevin, best friends forever. "Where are you, man?" Shaq whispered to the empty room. "We were supposed to make it big together." He ordered his usual dinner from his personal chef, grilled chicken with sweet potatoes, but barely touched it. Instead, he spent the evening watching old home videos on his giant TV screen. His mom had filmed some of their practice sessions. There was Kevin, teaching him the perfect jump shot form, both of them laughing, their whole lives ahead of them. Reporters always asked Shaq about his rags-to-riches story. They loved hearing about how he rose from the tough streets to become a basketball star, but he never told them about Kevin. That part of the story hurt too much. Later that night, Shaq lay in his king-sized bed, staring at the ceiling. He had another game tomorrow, another chance to hear thousands of fans screaming his name. His face would be on more magazine covers, his bank account would grow bigger, and his collection of luxury cars would get another edition. But something was missing. Success felt hollow without his best friend to share it with. Every time he stepped onto the court, a small part of him still looked for Kevin in the crowd, hoping to see that crooked smile again. As sleep finally came, Shaq's last thought was of their promise. "We're gonna make it big together." He had made it big, all right. But without Kevin, it didn't feel like making it at all. What he didn't know was that tomorrow would change everything. Tomorrow, he would find out what really happened to his childhood friend. And nothing, not his fame, his fortune, or his perfectly planned life, would ever be the same again. The next evening, after another winning game, Shaq didn't feel like going straight home. His mind was still stuck on yesterday's memories of Kevin. Instead of taking the highway, he turned his Ferrari onto the familiar streets of South Side Chicago. The neighborhood hadn't changed much in 20 years. The same corner store where they used to buy candy still had its faded blue awning. The rusty basketball court where they practiced every day was still there, though now the hoop was missing its net. Shaq drove slowly, letting the streetlights wash over his car. Kids playing on the sidewalk stopped to stare at the shiny Ferrari. He remembered being one of those kids, dreaming about fancy cars and better lives. "One day, that'll be us," Kevin used to say whenever a nice car drove by. A light rain started to fall, making the streets glisten. Shaq was about to turn around when he saw something that made his heart stop. A man in a torn jacket was huddled under the awning of their old corner store. Something about the way he stood, slightly bent to the left, just like Kevin used to stand when he was tired after practice. Shaq pulled over, his hands shaking on the steering wheel. The man must have heard the car because he looked up. For a split second, their eyes met under the flickering streetlight. "Kevin?" Shaq whispered. The Man's eyes widened with recognition. Then he turned and ran, disappearing into the dark alley behind the store. "Wait!" Shaq jumped out of his car, not caring about the rain anymore. He ran after the man, his expensive shoes splashing through puddles. "Kevin, stop! It's me, Shaq!" The alley was a maze of dumpsters and fire escapes. Shaq could hear footsteps ahead of him, but the rain made it hard to see. He turned a corner and found himself in a dead end. The man was there, backed against a brick wall, his face hidden under a dirty hood. "Please," Shaq said softly, catching his breath. "Just talk to me." Slowly, the man lowered his hood. The face was older, weathered by hard years, but those eyes, those were the same eyes that had watched Shaq practice jump shots 1,000 times. "You weren't supposed to see me like this," Kevin said, his voice rough from disuse. Shaq took a step forward, but Kevin held up his hand to stop him. "Don't. Come closer. I don't want your help." "What happened to you, man? Where did you go?" "I looked everywhere." "Life happened," Kevin laughed bitterly. "Not everyone gets to be a star, Shaq. Some of us just fall." A million questions raced through Shaq's mind. Why did Kevin disappear? How did he end up on the streets? Why didn't he ever reach out? But before he could ask any of them, Kevin spoke again. "You should go. Forget you saw me. You've got your perfect life. Don't let me mess it up." "Perfect life?" Shaq shook his head. "You think anything's been perfect since you disappeared? We made a promise, Kevin. Together. Remember?" For a moment, something flickered in Kevin's eyes, a shadow of their old friendship. But then he looked away. "Promises don't mean much on these streets. You of all people should know that." "Let me help you," Shaq pleaded. "I've got a big house, plenty of room." "I said no." Kevin's voice echoed off the wet walls. "I've got my reasons, okay? Just leave me alone." Before Shaq could stop him, Kevin darted past him and ran back into the maze of alleys. This time, Shaq didn't follow. He stood in the rain, staring at the spot where his best friend had stood. Something wasn't right. The Kevin he knew would never have run away like that. The way he kept looking over his shoulder, the nervous energy in his movements, it was like he was scared of something. Or someone. Back in his car, Shaq couldn't shake the image of Kevin's haunted eyes. He pulled out his phone and called his head of security, "Tony. I need you to find everything you can about Kevin Johnson," he said. "Where he's been, what he's been doing. Something happened to him, and I need to know what." "The Kevin from your childhood?" Tony asked. "Boss, that was 20 years ago." "Just do it," Shaq said firmly. "And Tony, keep it quiet. I don't want anyone knowing I'm looking for him." That night, Shaq couldn't sleep again. He paced his mansion's empty halls, his mind racing. The friend who had taught him everything about basketball was sleeping on the streets. The kid who dreamed of making it big was wearing torn clothes and running from shadows. "I'm going to help you," Shaq promised the darkness. Whether you want it or not, what Shaq didn't know was that trying to help Kevin would uncover secrets bigger and darker than he could imagine. His friend wasn't just homeless. He was hiding something. Something dangerous enough to keep him on the run. Something that would put both their lives at risk. But for now, Shaq just watched the rain outside his window, remembering two kids sharing dreams on rusty bleachers. Tomorrow, he would start looking for answers. Tomorrow, he would find out what really happened to the friend who had given him everything and then vanished into thin air. Shaq started his search at their old school, Martin Luther King Jr. High. The building looked smaller than he remembered, its red bricks faded by time. A security guard recognized him immediately and called the principal. "Mr. Thompson, what an honor!" Principal Davis wasn't the same principal from Shaq's time, but she knew all about him. His photo hung in the school's Hall of Fame. "What brings you here?" "I'm looking for information about an old friend," Shaq said. "Kevin Johnson. He was a student here 20 years ago." The principal's smile faded slightly. "Let me check our records." While she searched the computer, Shaq walked the hallways. Their old lockers were still there, though painted over many times. He ran his hand along locker 237, his and Kevin's secret meeting spot between classes. "Here it is," Principal Davis called him back. "Kevin Johnson." "Oh." She frowned at the screen. "He dropped out in 9th grade. There's a note here about a family emergency." "What kind of emergency?" "I'm sorry, but that information is private. You'd have to ask his family." Shaq's next stop was their old apartment building. Kevin's family had lived on the 3rd floor, right above the Jacksons. Mrs. Jackson used to give them cookies after practice. Maybe she still lived there. He climbed the creaky stairs, remembering how he and Kevin used to race up them. The building smelled the same, a mix of cooking spices and old carpet. He knocked on Mrs. Jackson's door, holding his breath. An old woman opened the door, her eyes going wide. "Little Shaq Thompson? Lord have mercy, you're all grown up." Mrs. Jackson invited him in for lemonade. Her apartment looked exactly the same, down to the plastic-covered couch and the photos of Jesus on the walls. But there was sadness in her eyes when Shaq mentioned Kevin. "Such a tragedy about his mama," she said, shaking her head. "Cancer took her fast. Poor Kevin tried to take care of his daddy after that, but James was already too far gone with them drugs." Shaq nearly dropped his glass. "Kevin's mom died? When?" "Right after you moved to the better school for basketball. That summer. Didn't you know?" No, Shaq hadn't known. He'd been so busy with his new private school, with training and tournaments. He'd tried calling Kevin a few times, but the number was disconnected. "James lost the apartment soon after," Mrs. Jackson continued. "Started running with them dealers from 53rd Street. Last I heard, he died of an overdose 5 years ago." Each word hit Shaq like a punch to the gut. While he'd been living his dream, Kevin had lost everything. "Do you know where Kevin went after they lost the apartment?" Mrs. Jackson's face darkened. "There were rumors, bad rumors. Some folks said he was working for them same dealers that got his daddy hooked. Others said he was sleeping in abandoned buildings. I tried to help, but he wouldn't take it. Proud, just like his mama." Shaq's security chief, Tony, had more information waiting when he got back to his car. Kevin's mother, Maria Johnson, died of pancreatic cancer in 2004, Tony read from his tablet. Father, James Johnson, had multiple arrests for drug possession, died in 2020 from an overdose, just like Mrs. Jackson said. What about Kevin? Where did he go after that? "That's where it gets strange," Tony said. "He basically disappeared. No job records, no address, no credit cards. It's like he became a ghost." "But," Tony hesitated, "but what?" "There are some weird gaps in his records, places where information should be but isn't. Like someone went through and erased it? That didn't make sense. Why would anyone erase records about a homeless man?" Shaq's phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Stop looking. You'll only make things worse. Can you trace this?" Shaq showed Tony the message. Tony tried, but the number was from a burner phone, another dead end. That evening, Shaq drove back to where he'd seen Kevin. The corner store owner remembered him coming around sometimes, buying small things with loose change. A woman at the homeless shelter said he'd slept there a few times last winter, but always left before sunrise. He helped me once, she said. Some guys were hassling me, trying to steal my bag. Kevin stepped in, talked them down, but he seemed scared after that, like he thought someone might have seen him. Everyone Shaq talked to had a different story about Kevin. He was kind but distant, helpful but mysterious, always watching over his shoulder, never staying in one place too long. Back home, Shaq spread everything he'd learned across his kitchen table. His mother's death, his father's addiction, the missing records, the warning text. None of it added up. The Kevin he knew would never have worked for drug dealers. He was too smart, too determined. And if he was just another homeless man, why were his records erased? Why did he run away like he was being hunted? Shaq's phone buzzed again. Another text. Last warning, walk away. But Shaq couldn't walk away. Not again. He'd failed Kevin once, when they were kids. He wouldn't fail him again. Tomorrow, he would go back to those streets. He would find Kevin and get the whole truth. No matter what it cost, no matter who was trying to stop him, he would help his friend. What Shaq didn't realize was that he was getting closer to a truth that powerful people wanted to keep hidden, and every step he took toward that truth put both him and Kevin in greater danger. The next morning, Shaq loaded his car with supplies, blankets, clean clothes, food, and water. He wasn't leaving that corner store until Kevin showed up again. Tony had tried to talk him out of it. "Boss, those warning texts mean someone's watching you," Tony had said. "At least let me come with you." But Shaq knew Kevin would never appear if he brought security. This had to be just between them, like the old days. He parked his car where he could see the store's entrance and waited. Hours passed. The sun climbed high, then started to sink. People came and went, some recognizing him, others just staring at his expensive car in their poor neighborhood. Just when he was about to give up, he saw Kevin. His friend was wearing the same torn jacket, shuffling toward the store with his head down. This time, Shaq didn't rush out. He waited until Kevin went inside, then quietly followed. The store owner was arguing with Kevin about a dented can of soup that was past its expiration date. "I'll pay for it," Shaq said, stepping forward. Kevin spun around, his eyes wild with fear until he recognized Shaq. Then his face just looked tired. "I told you to leave me alone. And I told you I wouldn't." Shaq turned to the store owner. "Give my friend whatever he wants. I'm paying." Kevin tried to leave, but Shaq blocked the door. "Just talk to me, please." 10 minutes. After a long moment, Kevin nodded. "Not here." They walked to their old basketball court, Kevin carrying a bag of groceries Shaq had bought him. The missing net had been replaced with a chain that clinked softly in the breeze. "You're looking into my past," Kevin said. "It wasn't a question. I had to know what happened to you. Did you ever think maybe I didn't want you to know?" Kevin sat on their old bleachers, his shoulders slumped. "Maybe I was trying to protect you?" Shaq sat beside him, keeping some distance. "Protect me from what?" "From the truth. From what I became." Kevin pulled out a sandwich from the grocery bag and stared at it. "You know about my mom?" "Yeah. I'm so sorry, Kevin. I should have been there." "You were living your dream?" "That's what I wanted." Kevin took a small bite of the sandwich, chewing slowly. "After Mom died, everything fell apart. Dad started using more. The dealers would come to our apartment, threatening him over money. I tried to work, to help pay them off, but it was never enough. Mrs. Jackson said there were rumors about you working for those dealers. Kevin laughed without humor. That's what everyone thought. Truth is, it was something else, something bigger. He glanced around nervously before continuing. But first, you need to know about Maria. Maria? Kevin reached into his jacket and pulled out a worn photo. A young woman in a graduation gown smiled at the camera, her eyes bright with hope. My daughter. Shaq stared at the photo, then at Kevin. You have a daughter? She's in college now. Medical school? Pride crept into Kevin's voice. She thinks I'm working overseas, sends me emails about her classes, her dreams of becoming a doctor. His hands trembled as he put the photo away. She has no idea her dad lives on the streets. Why didn't you tell me? I could have helped. I didn't want help. Kevin stood up suddenly. Everything I did, every choice I made, was to give her a better life, to keep her safe. Safe from what? But Kevin was looking past him, his face pale. A black SUV with tinted windows was driving slowly past the court. Kevin grabbed his grocery bag. I have to go. No, wait. Shaq caught his arm. Let me help you. Whatever trouble you're in, you don't understand. They're watching. Always watching. Kevin pulled away, but Shaq held on. Then, help me understand. Who's watching? What are you running from? Kevin looked at the SUV, then back at Shaq. Tomorrow, midnight, the old factory behind Wilson Street. Come alone, or I won't be there. He yanked his arm free and hurried away, vanishing into the gathering darkness. Shaq watched him go. The photo of Maria burned into his mind. A daughter. Kevin had been taking care of a daughter all these years. But that still didn't explain. The erased records, the warning texts, the mysterious SUV. His phone buzzed. Another text. You were warned. Now she pays the price. Attached was a photo. Maria walking across her college campus, unaware she was being photographed. Shaq's blood ran cold. He tried calling the number, but it was already disconnected. He started to run in the direction Kevin had gone, but his friend was long gone. Back in his car, Shaq's hands shook as he called Tony. I need everything you can find on Maria Johnson, Kevin's daughter. And I mean everything. Someone's threatening her. On it, boss. But there's something else you should know. Tony's voice was urgent. Those gaps in Kevin's records? They match a pattern I've seen before. In FBI files. FBI? What would they want with Kevin? I don't know. But whatever your friend got himself into, it's bigger than some street dealers. Much bigger. Shaq looked at the empty basketball court, remembering two kids sharing dreams on these bleachers. Now, one of those kids had a daughter in danger. The other had fame, fortune, and no idea what he was getting himself into. But he knew one thing. He would be at that factory tomorrow night. Whatever Kevin was hiding, whatever danger they were facing, they would face it together. Just like they'd promised all those years ago. What Shaq didn't know was that the midnight meeting would change everything. The truth Kevin was finally ready to share would put them all in the crosshairs of people who would stop at nothing to keep their secrets buried. Despite Tony's protests, Shaq went to his mansion to prepare for the midnight meeting. He couldn't risk having security teams spook Kevin again. But as evening fell, Tony called with urgent news. "Boss, I found Maria," Tony said. "She's a second-year medical student at Johns Hopkins. Perfect grades, full scholarship. But here's the weird part. Her tuition isn't just covered by the school. There's an offshore account making regular deposits into her student account. Kevin said he was paying for her education, Shaq remembered. But how? He's homeless. That's not all. Someone's been monitoring her email account. And get this, every month, like clockwork, she gets an email from her dad saying he's working on an oil rig in the Gulf of Mexico. Shaq's stomach tightened. More lies, more secrets. Can you protect her? Already on it. I've got people watching her campus. She's safe for now. But for now wasn't good enough. Shaq had to know the truth. He spent the next few hours pacing his mansion, watching the clock crawl toward midnight. At 11:30, he drove to the old Wilson Street factory. The building had been abandoned for years, its windows dark and broken. Shaq parked a block away and walked the rest of the distance, his footsteps echoing in the empty street. The factory's side door was unlocked. Inside, moonlight filtered through holes in the roof, casting strange shadows across rusty machinery. Shaq's phone buzzed. Another warning text. Last chance to walk away. He turned off his phone. You came alone. Kevin's voice echoed from the darkness. He stepped into a shaft of moonlight, looking more tired than ever. Of course I did. You're my brother. Kevin smiled sadly. Still the same Shaq. Always loyal. He sat on an old crate, gesturing for Shaq to sit across from him. Before I tell you everything, you need to promise me something. Promise you'll keep Maria safe, no matter what happens to me. Nothing's going to happen to you. Promise me. Kevin's voice cracked with desperation. I promise. Now please, tell me what's going on. Kevin took a deep breath. Remember those dealers who got my dad hooked? They weren't just street dealers. They were part of something bigger. A cartel that was taking over the whole South Side. After Dad died, I found out they had plans for you, too. For me? Why? Think about it. A rising basketball star from their neighborhood? They were going to use your success. Force you to launder their money through fake charities, investment schemes. They had it all planned out. Shaq felt cold despite the warm night. How do you know all this? Because I made a deal to stop them. Kevin pulled out his phone, checking something before continuing. The FBI had been watching the cartel. They needed someone on the inside, someone who knew the streets. I volunteered. You became an informant? Kevin nodded. Been undercover for years. My homelessness? It's partly real. I give most of my FBI money to Maria, but it's also my cover. Nobody suspects a homeless man of being a federal informant. The pieces started falling into place. The erased records, the mysterious surveillance, the offshore account. All this time, you were protecting me? Shaq's voice was barely a whisper. You were gonna make it big, Shaq. Really make it. I couldn't let them destroy that. Kevin stood up, pacing nervously. But now they know. Someone tipped them off. When you started looking into my past, asking questions, they connected the dots. A noise from above made them both freeze. Kevin's phone buzzed. His face went pale as he read the message. We have to go. Now! But it was too late. The factory's doors burst open. Men in black tactical gear poured in, their weapons raised. Kevin grabbed Shaq's arm and pulled him toward a back exit, but more men appeared there too. Run! Kevin shoved Shaq toward a broken window. Get to Mariah! Keep your promise! Before Shaq could stop him, Kevin ran the opposite direction, drawing the men's attention. Shots rang out. Shaq heard Kevin cry out in pain. Kevin, go! Shaq's athletic training kicked in. He dove through the window, glass shattering around him. He rolled to his feet and ran, his heart pounding. Behind him, he heard cars starting, more shots, shouting. He made it to his car and sped away, his hands shaking on the steering wheel. He tried calling Kevin's phone, but there was no answer. When he was far enough away, he pulled over and called Tony. "They've got Kevin," he said, his voice raw. "Call the FBI, tell them their informant's been made, and get Maria somewhere safe, now." "Already done, boss. She's being moved to a safe house as we speak." Shaq leaned his head against the steering wheel, Kevin's last words echoing in his mind. "Keep your promise. Keep Maria safe." But he had made another promise, too, 20 years ago on a rusty basketball court. A promise to make it big together. And he wasn't about to break either promise. "Tony, I need everything you can find on this cartel. Everything. And get me in touch with Kevin's FBI handlers. Boss, this is serious. These people are killers. So am I serious." Shaq started his car again. "They took my brother. Now I'm going to get him back." What Shaq didn't know was that this was exactly what the cartel wanted. By taking Kevin, they had drawn Shaq into their web. Now they had leverage over both the FBI informant and the famous basketball star. The game was no longer about basketball. It was about survival. Shaq's mansion became a war room. Tony had called in every favor he had, and now FBI agents filled the living room. Papers covered the walls, surveillance photos, cartel organizational charts, known locations. In the center was a photo of Kevin, taken during his last FBI debriefing. "The cartel's been operating in Chicago for 30 years, Agent Wilson, Kevin's FBI handler, explained. "Your friend has helped us build a case against their entire operation. Without his intel, we'd never have gotten close. And you just let them take him?" Shaq's voice was cold with anger. "Mr. Thompson, Kevin knew the risks. Shaq's phone buzzed. A video message from an unknown number. His hands trembled as he pressed play. Kevin appeared on screen, tied to a chair. His face was bruised, but his eyes were defiant. A masked man stood behind him. "Hello, Shaq," the man said. "Your friend has been quite helpful to the FBI. Now it's your turn to help us. You have connections, influence, clean money. We need all of that. Do as we say, and Kevin lives. Refuse." The man pressed a gun to Kevin's head. "Don't do it, Shaq," Kevin shouted. "Don't you dare." The video cut off. Another text followed. "Instructions coming soon. Tell no one, or he dies." Agent Wilson reached for the phone, but Shaq pulled it away. "You've done enough. This is between me and them now." "Mr. Thompson, we can't let you—" "Can't let me what? Save my friend? The one who gave up everything to protect me?" Shaq stood up, his full height making the agent step back. "You used him for years. Now it's my turn to help him." "Boss," Tony interrupted. "Maria's secure at the safe house, but she's asking questions. She knows something's wrong." Shaq closed his eyes. Two promises pulling him in opposite directions. Keep Maria safe. Save Kevin. How could he do both? His phone buzzed again. The instructions. Transfer $10 million to an offshore account. Use his charity foundation to clean drug money. Sign over his name and image rights to their shell companies. "They're trying to own you," Agent Wilson said, reading over his shoulder. "Once you do this, they'll never let you go. You'll be their puppet forever. Then let them think they've won." Everyone turned to look at Tony. He was studying the cartel's organizational chart. "Look here," he pointed. Their money laundering operation runs through this bank in the Cayman Islands. The same bank that's been sending money to Maria's account. Agent Wilson leaned in. Kevin was tracking their finances. That's how he could afford Maria's tuition. He was skimming from their own laundered money. Can we trace it? Shaq asked. Better. Tony smiled grimly. We can use it. Make them think you're cooperating while we track the money back to their leadership. It was dangerous. If the cartel suspected anything, Kevin would die. But it was their only chance. The next day, Shaq publicly announced a new charitable initiative. The press ate it up. Famous basketball star giving back to his old neighborhood. Nobody questioned why he chose that specific bank to handle the funds. For 3 days, Shaq played his part. He signed their papers, moved their money, smiled for cameras, all while FBI cyber teams followed every digital penny. Then Maria complicated everything. She showed up at Shaq's mansion, having slipped away from the safe house. I know my dad's in trouble, she said. The emails about the oil rig were fake, weren't they? He's been lying to me all along. Shaq saw Kevin in her determined eyes. He lied to protect you. Everything he did, every sacrifice he made, was for you. Then help me save him. She pulled out her phone. Those bank transfers to my account? I've been tracking them. Look at this pattern. Mariah, it turned out, had inherited her father's intelligence. She'd spent months analyzing the mysterious deposits, tracing them through dummy corporations. Her data, combined with the FBI's investigation, gave them what they needed: the cartel's entire financial network. But they were running out of time. The cartel was getting suspicious, demanding bigger transfers, more control. Then came another video. Kevin looking worse. 24 hours, the masked man said. Complete the transfers, or he dies. Shaq stared at the screen, remembering two kids on a basketball court, sharing dreams of making it big. They had promised to succeed together. Now it was time to end this together. I'm ready, he told Agent Wilson. But we do this my way. The plan was simple, dangerous, but simple. Shaq would meet the cartel bosses, pretending to sign over everything. The meeting would be at an abandoned warehouse, their territory. But this time, Shaq wouldn't be alone. Maria insisted on being part of it, despite everyone's objections. He's my father, she said. I'm tired of being protected. The warehouse was dark when Shaq arrived. Maria waited nearby, coordinating with FBI teams hidden in position. Tony monitored everything from a surveillance van. The cartel bosses emerged from the shadows. 3 men in expensive suits, looking more like bankers than criminals. Kevin was with them, barely conscious. The papers, one boss said, sliding a folder across a table. Shaq picked up the pen. Before I sign, tell me why. Why target me all those years ago? The boss smiled. This neighborhood raises 2 kinds of people: those who escape and those who stay to prey on the escapees. You were going to be our biggest success story, until your friend sacrificed everything to stop us. You didn't count on friendship being stronger than money. A costly mistake. One we're correcting now. Sign. Shaq pressed the pen to paper. You know what I learned in basketball? The best defense, he smiled, is a good offense. The warehouse erupted in light and sound. FBI teams crashed in through windows and doors. The bosses reached for weapons, but found themselves surrounded. In the chaos, Shaq launched himself at Kevin, shielding him as bullets flew. Maria's voice came through his earpiece, directing agents to cut off escape routes she'd identified through her financial tracking. When it was over, The cartel bosses were in handcuffs. Their entire operation was exposed. Maria's analysis had given the FBI everything they needed for convictions. Kevin was rushed to the hospital, Shaq and Maria at his side. "You broke your promise," he told Shaq weakly. "You were supposed to keep her safe, not let her fight a cartel." "She's your daughter," Shaq smiled. "Did you really think she'd stay protected while you were in danger?" Maria took her father's hand. "No more lies, Dad. No more sacrifices. We're in this together." "Together," Kevin echoed, looking at Shaq. "Just like we promised." 3 months later, Kevin was out of the hospital. The cartel bosses were facing life sentences. Maria had returned to medical school, but now she called her father every day. Her real father, not a fake oil rig worker. Shaq had kept both his promises. Maria was safe. And Kevin was finally free. "You know," Kevin said, watching Maria graduate at the top of her class. "Years later, we did make it big together, just not the way we planned." Shaq looked at his friend, no longer homeless, no longer hiding. Some things are bigger than basketball. The truth had almost destroyed them, but in the end, it had set them all free. The game wasn't about survival anymore. It was about living, really living, with the people who meant everything, and that was the biggest win of all. Thanks for sticking with us until the end of this incredible story of friendship, sacrifice, and redemption. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Drop your city and country in the comments below. Each comment helps spread this story of hope and loyalty to more people around the world. If this story touched your heart, remember to hit that like button. And if you want more emotional stories that remind us about what truly matters in life, make sure to subscribe to our channel. Together, we can share these messages of friendship and kindness with everyone who needs to hear them. Until next time, remember, sometimes our biggest heroes don't wear capes. Sometimes they're just friends who sacrifice everything to protect the ones they love. Stay kind, stay blessed, and we'll see you in the next story.